Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into Greenpeace, an organization you've definitely heard of, probably seen in action, maybe even argued about. We've got a whole stack of sources here to try and understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're aiming to unpack, where they came from, their biggest moments, those really signature tactics they use, and importantly, the criticisms they've faced. It's about the how as much as the what.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. It's kind of amazing how it all kicked off from just one specific nuclear test. How did that spark everything?
Well, you have to go back to the late 60s. The U.S. planned this big underground nuclear test, codenamed Cannikin, on Chitka Island in Alaska. And the big fear, because it's a tectonically unstable area, was earthquakes, tsunamis even.
Right, that makes sense. So people were genuinely scared. How did that fear turn into, actual protests on the ground?
Oh, the reaction was pretty immediate. You had, I think, about 7,000 people actually blocking the border crossing between BC and Washington, holding signs. One I remember reading was, "Don't make a wave. It's your fault if our fault goes." Right.
Yeah, that is clever. But that first test still happened, didn't it? But then the U.S. announced an even bigger one was planned. How did the opposition react then?
That's when it really coalesced. You had figures like Jim Bolin, who'd been in the U.S. Navy, and Irving and Dorothy Stowe, Quakers. Bolin learned about bearing witness from Irving Stowe, this idea of passive resistance, just being present to object.
Just showing up.
Essentially, yes. But it was actually Jim's wife, Marie Bolin, who suggested, why don't we sail a boat up there? Inspired by earlier anti-nuclear voyages. That idea got traction, the media picked it up, and bam, in 1970, the Don't Make a Wave Committee was formed.
Okay, the Don't Make a Wave Committee. But the name Greenpeace and this whole idea of who actually founded it, reading through the sources, it seems, well, messy.
It is messy. There wasn't really one founder. It evolved. Irving Stowe organized a benefit concert Joan Baez played, and that raised the money. They chartered a fishing boat, the Phyllis Cormac.
And the name.
That came from an activist on board, Bill Darnell. He combined green and peace, and they renamed the ship Greenpeace. They sailed in '71. The Coast Guard did stop them, citing weather, but the crew was apparently quite sympathetic, and the whole thing generated massive publicity.
So even though the U.S. detonated that second bigger bomb.
Right, they still did it. But the outcry was so huge afterwards, fueled by the Greenpeace voyage, that they actually canceled further tests at Chitka.
Huh. So they didn't stop the bomb itself, but they kind of won in the end by just being there and making noise.
Exactly. Bearing witness worked, maybe not in the moment, but strategically. The Don't Make a Wave Committee officially changed its name to the Greenpeace Foundation in '72. And yeah, it really was this sort of organic, decentralized thing early on, which, caused problems later, but also maybe gave it its strength.
Okay, so Chitka put them on the map, but then they shifted focus pretty quickly, didn't they, towards French nuclear testing?
They did. After Chitka, the next big target was French atmospheric testing at Mururoa Atoll in the Pacific. And this is where David McTaggart comes in.
Ah, McTaggart. A key figure.
A very key figure. He was a former businessman, sailed his own yacht, the Vega, renamed it Greenpeace III, into the exclusion zone in '72. The French Navy rammed his boat and actually beat him up quite badly.
Whoa.
Yeah. But, crucially, someone on his crew got photos. They smuggled the film out. It went public, massive international incident. And that pressure, it eventually led France to stop testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. A huge win.
That direct confrontation, even getting physically assaulted, seems like it really cemented that tactic for them, didn't it?
I think it absolutely did. It showed that confrontation could work, even against a major government. And after Irving Stowe passed away in '75, the focus broadened again. You had campaigns against Whaling Project Ahab, then toxic waste, seal hunting. They published their Declaration of Interdependence around then, too, laying out a wider vision.
So you've got this growing movement, but it started very loosely organized. How did they manage to scale up from, a few boats and protests into the global organization we see today?
That was a major challenge. By the mid-'70s, you had groups popping up all over the place using the Greenpeace name, maybe 15, 20 groups by '77. But the original Canadian office, they were drowning in debt. There were big fights over money, over direction. The whole thing nearly fell apart.
So McTaggart stepped in again. After facing down the French Navy, he tackled internal politics.
Pretty much. He'd been building bridges between the European groups. He basically persuaded the Canadian office to accept a new structure. The Europeans helped pay off the debt. And in 1979, Greenpeace International was formally set up in Amsterdam.
Right, uniting all the disparate groups.
Exactly, under one umbrella. Regional offices kept autonomy, but contributed funds upwards and got a vote internationally. It kind of balanced global strategy with local action.
And that funding model is still famous, right? No corporate money, no government cash.
Is still a core principle. They rely on individual donors, foundation grants. They were pioneers of that face-to-face street fundraising, getting people to sign up for monthly donations. You've probably seen them.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So that keeps them independent. And they've kept evolving, even digitally.
Yeah, they've adapted. They set up a mobilization lab, Mob Lab, focus on digital campaigning, community organizing. It actually spun off as its own thing in 2017. But today, yeah, Greenpeace International oversees, I think, 25 regional offices covering 55 countries. It's a huge network.
Okay, so that's how they got here. Let's pivot to what they actually do. Their campaigns are legendary, often controversial. What are the core priorities?
Well, their mission statement covers a lot. Exposing environmental problems, obviously climate change. They aim for near zero emissions by 2050, biodiversity, tackling overconsumption, promoting renewables, and interestingly, nurturing peace, which goes back to their anti-nuclear roots. And their main tool is that nonviolent creative confrontation.
Let's break that down. Climate and energy seems like a huge one for them.
Oh, definitely. And they were early on this. They put out a sustainable development scenario for climate change way back in '93. They were big on raising awareness in the 90s. Remember the ozone layer?
Fakely the hole in the ozone layer, CFCs.
Right. Greenpeace pushed hard for phasing out those ozone-depleting chemicals under the Montreal Protocol. And they did something really clever. They actually worked with industry to develop CFC-free fridge technology. They called it Green Freeze.
Green Freeze, I have heard of that. Did it actually work?
Massively. They got a UN award for it in '97. By 2011, something like 40% of the world's fridges use that tech. Hundreds of millions of units. So, yeah, real impact.
Wow. And today, on climate?
Today, they're pushing for huge emission cuts from developed nations. Funding for developing countries to go green, stop deforestation. They have this energy revolution plan aiming for 80% renewables globally by 2050. Very ambitious targets.
And the direct action continues.
Absolutely. They're constantly targeting coal plants, blocking coal shipments, protesting mining New Zealand, Svalbard, Australia, the UK. They've gone after oil sands in Canada. There's that King's North court case in the UK in 2007.
What happened there?
6 activists climbed a smokestack at a coal plant. They were charged with criminal damage, but argued they were preventing greater damage from climate change. And they were acquitted. The jury agreed. The New York Times called it one of the year's most influential ideas.
That's incredible. A legal precedent, almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And their Go Beyond Oil campaign targets Arctic drilling, puts pressure on companies like Cairn Energy and on governments.
Okay, what about nuclear power? That's always been a big one for them, and highly divisive.
Yeah, staunchly anti-nuclear. They call it dangerous, polluting, expensive, and non-renewable. They always point to Chernobyl and Fukushima as the ultimate risks. Their argument is that its climate benefits are marginal, and it just sucks money away from real solutions like renewables and efficiency.
And that stance hasn't softened over the years.
Not really. In 2022, they were threatening to sue the EU for labeling nuclear as green. They cheered when Germany finally phased out its plants in 2023. It's deeply embedded in their DNA.
Have they faced pushback on the nuclear front? Aside from, the industry itself.
Oh, yeah. There was a controversial ad back in '94 about the Sellafield plant in the UK, claiming it would kill thousands, showing a child with hydrocephalus. It got banned as unsubstantiated. And then there was the whole EDF spying case in France.
EDF, the energy giant. They spied on Greenpeace.
Yes. In 2011, EDF was convicted of spying, hacking computers. Greenpeace got damages. Right. Though, interestingly, EDF got cleared of the conspiracy charge on appeal later. But it shows the kind of underhanded tactics they sometimes face.
Okay, so energy is huge. But they also focus heavily on forests and toxic waste, right? Different battleground.
Definitely. Forests, their big goal was zero deforestation by 2020. Ambitious, maybe didn't quite hit it, but they put immense pressure on huge corporations, Unilever, Nike, KFC, Kit Kat, McDonald's, linking their supply chains to deforestation. And often, it worked. Companies changed policies.
And they worked on legislation, too.
Yeah, they campaigned for a decade to get the EU to ban illegal timber imports. That became law in 2010, a big win.
I remember those Kit Kat videos about palm oil. They went absolutely viral.
They really did. Palm oil in Indonesia has been a massive focus. They targeted Wilmar International, showing deforestation linked to them. That Kit Kat Give the Orangutan a Break video and the orangutan animation later on, huge public impact, put massive pressure on brands.
But not always smooth sailing, even in the forests campaign. Wasn't there some incident in Finland?
Ah, yes. That was controversial. In 95, they removed an ancient fallen tree from what was going to be a national park. They claimed it was symbolic, from a clear-cut area. But the state forestry company accused them of theft, said it fell naturally. Bit of a mess, that one.
Right, and legal battles, too.
Constantly. They had a long fight with Resolute Forest Products, a Canadian logging company. Resolute sued them. But eventually in 2020, a court ordered Resolute to pay Greenpeace nearly $1 million in legal costs. So big stakes involved.
And toxics, how do they tackle that, especially with complex global supply chains?
A key moment was their Dirty Laundry report in 2011. It exposed how major fashion brands were linked to toxic water pollution in China. That sparked their detox fashion campaign.
I remember that. Getting brands to commit to cleaning up their act.
Exactly. Loads of big names signed on, promising to eliminate hazardous chemicals. And they also had the Guide to Greener Electronics for years, ranking companies like Apple, Samsung, Dell on toxics, e-waste, energy use. That definitely pushed the industry to improve.
Okay, and then there's the Arctic. Very visible, very dramatic campaigns there.
Hugely visible. The Save the Arctic campaign is all about creating a global sanctuary, stopping drilling, industrial fishing, military activity. It led to one of their biggest confrontations in recent years.
The Arctic Sunrise incident in Russia?
That's the one. 2013, 30 activists protested at a Gazprom oil platform in the Russian Arctic. The Russian Coast Guard boarded their ship, arrested everyone, initially charged with piracy, which is incredibly serious.
Piracy for a protest?
Yeah, it caused an international uproar. Later downgraded to hooliganism, and eventually they were all released under an amnesty. But it showed the risks they take and how far some states will go.
And that whole episode led to them targeting Lego.
Yeah, kind of indirectly, because Lego had a long-standing partnership with Shell, and Shell was pushing for Arctic drilling. So in 2014, Greenpeace launched this boycott campaign against Lego. Their video, Lego, Everything Is Not Awesome, parodying the movie song, got millions and millions of views.
Did it work? Did Lego ditch Shell?
They did. Lego announced they wouldn't renew the Shell partnership, a massive PR win for Greenpeace, showing how targeting brand partnerships can be effective.
But not always wins in the Arctic, right? Norway, for instance.
No, definitely not always. They had repeated protests against Statoil's rigs in Norway, activists dressed as polar bears occupying rigs. But in 2020, Norway's Supreme Court ruled that the government could continue issuing licenses for oil exploration in the Arctic, a major setback for the campaign there.
Let's switch gears to another really contentious area, GMOs, genetically modified organisms. This has drawn some serious fire from the scientific community.
It really has. Greenpeace is generally opposed to GM food. They, for example, supported Zambia when it rejected U.S. GM food aid, although they added the caveat that if no non-GM aid was available, it should be accepted, which sometimes gets missed.
And they funded some controversial research.
Yes. They funded work by Gilles-Eric Seralini, whose study claimed GMAs caused tumors in rats. That study was heavily criticized for its methods, retracted by the journal, though later republished elsewhere. It definitely fueled the debate, but also damaged credibility in some scientific circles.
The big flashpoint seems to have been golden rice, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Golden rice is engineered to produce beta-carotene, a source of vitamin A, to help fight deficiency in developing countries. Greenpeace opposes it. They argue there are better existing ways to tackle malnutrition, that resources should go to those, and they raise concerns about corporate control and safety.
And that led to that open letter from Nobel laureates.
It did. In 2016, 107 Nobel winners signed a letter calling on Greenpeace to end its opposition to GMOs, particularly golden rice. They said the opposition was based on emotion and dogma contradicted by data. A really sharp rebuke.
How did Greenpeace respond to that?
They defended their position. They said the accusation they were blocking golden rice was false and argues that the focus should be on diverse diets and ecological farming, calling golden rice a drain on resources that could be better used elsewhere. So still very much opposed.
Okay. Beyond specific campaigns, they talk about bigger economic changes, alternative systems, and central to almost everything they do, historically at least, are their ships.
The ships are iconic, aren't they? The first Rainbow Warrior, bought in '78, it confronted whalers in Iceland, evacuated the Rongelap Islanders exposed to U.S. nuclear fallout, and then, of course, the bombing.
Auckland, 1985. That was huge news globally.
Absolutely devastating. The French Secret Service bombed the ship in harbor, killed a photographer, Fernando Pereira. France initially denied it, then tried to cover it up. Eventually, they admitted it, called it state terrorism, paid compensation. A truly dark moment.
But in a way, it also galvanized huge support for Greenpeace, didn't it? Made them seem like victims of state power.
Paradoxically, yes. It generated immense sympathy and outrage worldwide, made their cause seem even more vital. They commissioned a second Rainbow Warrior later, though that one had its own incident, running aground on a reef in the Philippines in 2005.
Ouch. Damaging a protected reef.
Yeah, not a good look. They paid a fine for that. Now they have Rainbow Warrior III and the Vienga Arctic Sunrise, which we mentioned. And they're currently campaigning hard against deep-sea mining, protesting at the International Seabed Authority, warning about the risks to ocean ecosystems and climate. So inevitably, all this activism, this direct action, it provokes strong reactions, positive and negative.
Yeah, you see lawsuits constantly, right? Companies suing for lost profits, damage to reputation. I even saw the term sailor-mongering used.
That's a specific legal term sometimes used in maritime law, often aimed at activists interfering with shipping or offshore operations. Companies like Suncor or Total have sued them. Though sometimes Greenpeace wins, like a recent case where Total sued over emissions reporting was dismissed in France. But the pressure goes both ways. We mentioned EDF spying. Shell, BP, others have also been accused of infiltrating Greenpeace, monitoring activists. There have been threats, violence, and ultimately the Rainbow Warrior bombing is the most extreme example.
And governments pushing back, too, like Russia recently.
Exactly. In 2023, Russia declared Greenpeace an undesirable organization, accused them of interfering in internal affairs, anti-Russian propaganda. Basically makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for them to operate there.
Okay, so that's the external pushback. But what about criticisms aimed at Greenpeace itself, from former members or about specific campaigns?
One of the loudest critics has been Patrick Moore. He was involved very early on, left in '86. He claims they became too political, anti-science. He criticizes their stance on GMOs, nuclear, and claimed they wanted a universal chlorine ban, which Greenpeace denies.
How does Greenpeace respond to Moore?
They acknowledge his early role, but dispute his founder status and say his version of events and reasons for leaving are his own. It's become a long-running, quite bitter dispute.
Right. And then there was a Brent Spar in '95. That was a huge controversy over an old oil platform.
Oh yes, Brent Spar. Greenpeace occupied the platform to stop Shell from sinking it in the deep Atlantic. They claimed it still held thousands of tons of oil sludge. Shell said it was much less. The journal Nature accused Greenpeace of exaggerating the numbers.
So Greenpeace got it wrong.
Well, their measurements were done under difficult protest conditions. Greenpeace later admitted the oil estimate was likely too high. But importantly, the BBC later apologized to Greenpeace for reporting they had deliberately lied. And the public pressure generated by the campaign was immense. Shell eventually backed down and agreed to dismantle the rig on shore. So even with the disputed numbers, the campaign achieved its ultimate goal.
A messy win, maybe. What about internal issues, the Pascal-Husting commute?
Yeah, it was awkward. In 2013, it came out that their international program director was regularly flying 400 kilometers between his home in Luxembourg and their Amsterdam office. For an organization campaigning against aviation emissions.
That doesn't look good.
Not at all. Caused a public uproar, as reports said. He quickly switched to taking the train. But it really highlighted that tension holding the world to high standards means you're held to them too, even on personal choices.
And the Nazca Lines incident in Peru, that seems like a major unforced error.
Oh, absolutely. A disaster, really. 2014, climate talks in Lima. Activists laid out a big yellow banner near the famous hummingbird geoglyph, part of the ancient Nazca Lines, a UN World Heritage Site.
But you're not supposed to walk there, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
These specific paths, they walked right across the fragile ground, leaving footprints, causing damage. The Peruvian government was furious, called their apology a joke, pursued legal action. It was a huge own goal, damaging their reputation badly, especially in Latin America. Just a clear case of a stunt backfiring and harming the very environment, or cultural heritage in this case, they claim to protect.
Wow. And finally, the anti-whaling campaign in Norway. We touched on whaling earlier, but there is specific criticism there too.
Yes, in the 90s. Critics, including some environmentalists, allege Greenpeace focused heavily on Norwegian whaling, mainly because it generated big donations, particularly from the U.S., while maybe ignoring, say, less charismatic but equally important issues like shark finning.
Did Greenpeace respond to that?
They rejected the idea it was purely about money. But years later, in 2015, their then executive director, Kumi Naidu, did admit the anti-whaling campaign in Norway had been a miscalculation. And then, just to reiterate that GMO point, the Nobel laureate's letter in 2016 remains a significant criticism, framing their stance as based on emotion and dogma.
So, wrapping this all up, it's quite a journey. From a small group protesting a nuclear test to this global, often controversial environmental giant. They've definitely made waves, changed policies, forced industries to change.
Absolutely. They pioneered tactics, brought issues like climate change, deforestation, toxics into the mainstream long before many others. But we've also seen the controversies, the criticisms, the legal fights, the times they've arguably overstepped or gotten things wrong. It's the complex reality of that kind of high-stakes confrontational activism.
It's a powerful story of how determination can create change, but also how that change often comes with intense debate and pushback. They are undeniably a major force in the environmental world, for better or worse, depending on who you ask.
Which leaves us with a big question, really. When you look at the urgent environmental crises we face, how do you balance the need for bold, direct action, like Greenpeace often takes, with the risks, the controversies, the potential for backlash, even unintended harm like in Nazca? What's the right line to walk? Something for you to think about.